This is a matter I have raised a number of times on the Senate floor and intend to continue raising. It is the matter of the human rights abuses in the People's Republic of China. And I'd like to talk about some specific examples, starting with the one-child policy. I want to talk to you about Fan Yiyan-mei. PRC officials forced Fan Yiyan-mei, who was 7 months pregnant with her second daughter, to undergo an abortion. While her husband, Dan Yiyuan, was at work, 5 family planning officials abducted Ms. Fan on June 2nd, 2012. When she couldn't pay the fine of 40,000 renminbi, they restrained her and forcibly aborted her daughter. As her husband recounted, quote, "At the hospital, they held her down. They covered her head with a pillowcase. She couldn't do anything because they were restraining her. The so-called medics forced her to, quote, sign an abortion consent form by inking her thumb and pressing it against the paper. Then they proceeded to inject toxins into the brain of her unborn daughter. After the injection, Jian-mei suffered excruciating contractions until 3 a.m. on June 4th. Then, having received no anesthesia, she gave birth to her deceased child. Jian-mei said, "I could feel the baby jumping around inside me all the time. But then she went still. It was much more painful than my first childbirth. The baby was lifeless. She was all purple and blue." In an act of heartlessness that is difficult to comprehend, the so-called doctors who performed this abortion left the lifeless bodies of Fen's 7-month-old baby on her bed beside her, leaving a bereaved mother with nothing but the sight of what could have been. Jian-mei's father-in-law rushed to the hospital, but family planning officials prevented him from seeing Jian-mei until after the abortion. After seeing her mother for the first time after her forced abortion, Fen's eldest daughter innocently inquired, "What happened to your tummy? Where did the baby go?" Reggie Littlejohn, a world-renowned human rights activist who broke this story in the United States, stated in the wake of this tragic story, quote, "This is an outrage. No legitimate government would commit or tolerate such an act." China is among the leading nations in suicide rates, and it is the only nation where more women commit suicide than men. A large contributing factor to this morose distinction is the totalitarian one-child policy. Another example is the crackdown on lawyers. When the United States engages with China in any sort of bilateral negotiation or agreement, we have to understand that the rule of law is not a reality in the PRC. Despite laws duly passed by the National People's Congress and a supposed constitution, the reality since 1949 remains unchanged. China has a rule of the party, the Communist Party, and it is ready to punish anyone who challenges its violation of the law within the legal system. The latest example is human rights lawyer Pu Jiayang. In early May 2014, Pu attended a small private seminar where the participants discussed the Tiananmen Square massacre and the party's violent suppression of students. Having been a student leader during the infamous 1989 protests, marking the auspicious occasion was no doubt of personal importance to Pu. The following month, Pu was arrested and charged with, quote, illegally obtaining personal information of citizens and, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble. As the year progressed, PRC authorities added additional charges of, quote, inciting splitism and inciting ethnic hatred. In May 2015, a Beijing court officially indicted Pu on 2 of these charges, and he remains in custody today. While legal officials cited Pu's criticisms of the PRC's treatment of the Uyghur ethnic minorities, his real offense was accepting cases and representing victims of forced eviction and shining a light on China's labor camps. His defendants included a who's who of China's prominent political dissidents, including Liu Xiaobo, a brave, selfless action that undoubtedly painted a target on Pu's back. Prior to his arrest, the PRC praised Pu as a paragon of social justice. The state-run China Newsweek magazine named Mr. Pu the most influential person promoting the rule of law in 2013. This is a microcosm of life in authoritarian China. Compliance with the party and compliance with the law are often at odds, and the party always wins. In the past year, Beijing has detained and jailed hundreds of activists standing for the rule of law. Ideals the party ostensibly espouses. Words are one thing. Public embarrassment of public officials is quite another. Xi Jinping and his cohorts cannot abide the erosion of their credibility or anything that would threaten their legitimacy. A third example. Pastor Zhang Shouji. Under President Xi, the atheist Communist Party of China has targeted Christianity for special oppression. Using a campaign in Zhejiang, a province which President Xi ran earlier in his career, to forcibly remove crosses from churches. The PRC has gone on in some cases to bulldoze entire churches and to arrest pastors and congregants for standing boldly for their faith. Persecution of Christianity is not confined to Zhejiang. One such victim of this crackdown is Pastor Zhang Shouji. On July 4th, 2014, the Nanlei County People's Court, ignoring domestic and international due process provisions, sentenced Pastor Zhang Shouji to 12 years in prison on account of, quote, fraud and gathering a crowd to disrupt the public order. Again, arrest charges in China do not reflect reality. Prior to his arrest, Pastor Zhang was defending the rights of his church in regard to land that they had purchased. Pastor Zhang and his parishioners traveled to Beijing 3 times in November 2013 seeking resolution of the land dispute. Maybe this is what the People's Court meant by fraud. According to his congregants, the minister also had a ministry of helping victims of legal injustice seek restitution. Perhaps this is what the Communist Party referred to in its charge of disrupting public order. The following month, the Puyang Municipality Intermediate People's Court rejected Zhang's appeal. In October, the Nanlei County Court threatened to auction off Zhang's house to pay for a court-ordered fine, ordering Zhang's family to leave the house by October 26th. In response, Zhang's mother physically stood between the Chinese officials and her home, holding gasoline in one hand and a lighter in the other. It is a sad reflection of China's supposed progress on human rights. When a citizen feels her only recourse against a dictatorial regime is the threat of self-immolation. His sister, having been detained along with several of Pastor Zhang's parishioners, suffered in one of China's most infamous black prisons for 1.5 years. Her words, penned in this letter, require no substitute. I am Zhang Qiujian, one of the Nanli County Christian church members detained in 2013. When my brother was kidnapped, I went with other church members to his public security bureau for information about his detention. Unexpectedly, I became the target of arrest, as well as more than a dozen other church members. We became prisoners who were unprepared and innocent. The prison was hell on earth. No other words can describe it. In prison, I was very grateful. I truly felt that God was with me, even though I suffered punishment in prison. I had a thankful heart. I had joy from God. I deeply knew my true and living God. While my body suffered, my heart was free. God let me learn different life lessons. I know that the more persecution I endure, the greater the blessing. Mr. President, in America, we should stand with victims of oppression. In America, we should stand with Christians being persecuted by the brutal communist totalitarian dictatorship. In America, we should stand for women's rights, for women being forced to commit forced abortions. These are horrific acts of brutality. They are inhumane. They are contrary not only to American values, but to human rights across the globe. And they are carried out as a matter of policy in the People's Republic of China. You know, when it comes to Chinese oppression, when it comes to communist oppression, this is not an abstract or academic matter for me. My family has been tortured at the hands of communists in Cuba. My father was imprisoned and tortured by Batista in Cuba, and my aunt was imprisoned and tortured by Castro's communist goons in Cuba. Communist oppression is real, and we have a powerful example of what America could do. When the Soviet Union was in power, this body renamed the street in front of the Soviet embassy Sakharov Plaza. Renaming that done by President Reagan, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley introduced the resolution here in this body. Every day, the Soviet officials had to write on the address of their embassy, Sakharov Plaza, honoring the imprisoned dissident. This resolution is to use the same power of moral clarity, the same power of shaming, the same power of speaking the truth to shine a light on the oppression in China. When Senator Grassley took the lead with Sakharov Plaza, that helped shame the Soviet Union into changing their conduct. We should use the same moral authority with respect to the People's Republic of China. Now, my resolution is co-sponsored by Senator Rubio, Senator Toomey, Senator Sass. It was on a path to being unanimously approved by this body. Every Republican had signed off on it, and initially every Democrat had as well. And yet, moments before it was about to pass the United States Senate, unfortunately, the senior senator from California decided to come to the floor and object. Now, after objecting, after blocking its passage, Senator Feinstein put out a press release with which I agree emphatically. Senator Feinstein observed powerfully that we urgently request the Chinese government to allow Liu Jia to seek medical treatment abroad and release Liu Xiaobo, the world's only jailed Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Senator Feinstein was exactly right. If anything should bring us together in bipartisan agreement, it should be against the Communist Party wrongful imprisonment and oppression of a Nobel Peace Laureate. And yet, sadly, each time I have attempted to follow the successful pattern of Sakharov Plaza to rename the street in front of the Chinese embassy Liu Xiaobo Plaza, the senior senator from California stood up and objected. For the life of me, I cannot understand why any member of this body would choose to stand with Communist Party oppressors against dissidents, against human rights, against women's rights, against the rights of those standing up to speak for freedom. Yes, we have to negotiate with the Chinese. Yes, we have to talk to them. Just like in the Cold War, we negotiated at Reykjavik with Gorbachev, but we did it from moral authority and truth. If we are afraid of even embarrassing the Communist Party, if their conduct doesn't embarrass them, we shouldn't shy away from speaking the truth. Accordingly, I ask unanimous consent that the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee be discharged from further consideration, and the Senate now proceed to S-Res 224. I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Reserving the right to object, and this is the second time I will have objected. I would like to, since my name was raised and a communication of mine was read, I would like to explain the circumstances. Yes, this is a letter that I wrote to the Chinese ambassador. And yes, I do feel that the wife of this man should be released from house arrest, and the man himself, the Nobel laureate, should be released by the Chinese. He has certainly served time for a substantial period. And more than that, I do not believe works to the benefit of China, the family, human rights, or the progress of the country. Unlike the senator from Texas, I've had a long experience with the Chinese, going back more than 30 years. And I know what can convince them to move toward a goal, and I know what will become a real stumbling block and a point of opposition. And to change the name of a street on which the Chinese American embassy rests here will only be a greater stumbling block to achieving this goal. So I will object to that. Since my name was also raised, or San Francisco's name was raised in his prior discussion, I would respectfully ask if I could make a few remarks about Kate Steinle and the situation that the senator from Texas has raised.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Respectfully, Senator, I do not believe that you know much about San Francisco. I'm a lifelong San Franciscan. I served the city as a mayor for 9 years, president of the Board of Supervisors for 7, and another 8 years as supervisor. I believe the city of my birth, my education, I know something about. The reason for the defeat of the sheriff is multifaceted. It doesn't just begin with one thing, and I want you to know that. With respect to the situation you spoke about, which is whether a local sheriff should, in fact, respond to the federal government request, if that request is for a detainer, if that request is for a communication, I believe very strongly that that sheriff should do that. And was that part of the campaign of the sheriff that is going to be the sheriff-elect? I can't say with any specificity, but I can say that that's my belief. I think that going overboard and punishing everybody makes very little sense. So I am hopeful that the Department of Homeland Security, through its efforts with the PEP program, will be able to secure cooperation from the city and county of San Francisco. If it does not, then that is another story. But I believe the department is making headway in discussions with other communities that are, in fact, sanctuary cities. Since we're on the subject, in 1985, as mayor of the city, I was the first person to be sought out by the Archbishop who asked for a brief reprieve or a reprieve for nuns from El Salvador. And that was the first piece of legislation. It was small, and it was restricted to a country that was in a civil war with some terrible things happening. Since that time, the sanctuary concept has expanded considerably. And to some extent, I think far beyond what it should be. But I think the way to do this is through hearings and discussion among the members, and not with over-the-top rhetoric that moves visceral impulses, because we have to live, Senator, by the public policy we espouse, and we have to know that it's wise and prudent, and I deeply believe that. So I just wanted to clarify the record, and I thank you very much for allowing me to do so, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
You know, I would note, with regard to Kate's Law, the senior senator from California just said that going overboard and punishing everyone is not something we should do. This is reprising the same theme the Democratic leader said, that somehow incarcerating aggravated felons is punishing everyone. As the son of an immigrant, I take offense at the suggestion from the Democratic Party that every immigrant is somehow an aggravated felon. Incarcerating murderers and rapists is not punishing everyone.
Would the senator allow a question?
I would be happy to.
I don't believe there was anything that I said that related to our letting aggravated murderers and others who would reap great harm to our society. I do not favor that, and I would like the record to clearly reflect that.
I would note that the senior senator from California characterized Kate's Law, and this was a verbatim quote, as going overboard and punishing everyone. And Kate's Law is targeted only to aggravated felons. It is only murderers and rapists and other violent criminals, those who have committed aggravated felonies and have re-entered the country illegally. And so what the Democratic Party is attempting to do, what the Democratic leader attempted to do, is to suggest that incarcerating illegal immigrants who are murderers and rapists is somehow maligning or impugning immigrants. To the contrary, it is targeting violent criminals. And I do not believe the millions of legal immigrants who followed the rules, like my father did, are in any way swept into a law that is targeting aggravated felons. Aggravated felons is a discrete category, and had Kate's Law passed 5 years ago, Kate Steinle would still be alive today.
If I might respond, I think then you're a member of the Judiciary Committee. I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee is on the floor. That's something we ought to take a look at. I haven't reviewed the case law. I don't think ever on this specific point. I would like an opportunity to do so. But what I really bristle to is the extreme rhetoric and throwing everybody into the same basket as somebody who is a violent criminal. Because the immigrants that I know in California, by and large, are not violent criminals. They're family people. They sustain the #1 agricultural industry in America. They work hard. They pay their taxes. They get in line for legalization. And they're good citizens. And our economy is better for it, not worse for it. So I don't want to impugn everybody, which your broad sweeping language candidly does.
With respect, I would note that the only overreaching rhetoric that has been heard on this floor has come from the Democratic leader, suggesting somehow that targeting violent criminals is targeting all immigrants. It is worth noting, Kate's Law addresses only aggravated felons. And so the senior senator from California's suggestion that we should not assume aggravated felons are criminals is a statement that on its face makes no sense. They are, by definition, it is only the violent criminals, the aggravated felons this is targeted to. I will say I'm encouraged, though, that the senior senator from California stated she would be interested in the Judiciary Committee taking this up. As she noted, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee is here. There is unanimous support on the Republican side of the aisle, and it would truly be significant if the senior senator from California were willing to join with Republicans in targeting actual aggravated felons, which is what Kate's law does. She says she doesn't want overheated rhetoric. The rhetoric has been coming from the Democratic side. What I have been saying is we should not be releasing violent criminal illegal aliens. That is a common sense proposition that the overwhelming majority of the American people agree with. Let me also make a point about the senior senator from California's objection for the third time now to my effort to stand up to communist Chinese oppression. You know, it is one thing for members of this body to give a good speech, to send a letter, to put out a press release. That's something Washington does a lot. It's something we're really quite good at. It's another thing to act. We should be acting. We should be leading. Now, she suggested this would be counterproductive. I would note the senior senator from California did not address the fact that when we followed the exact same strategy in the 1980s under President Reagan with Senator Grassley's leadership of renaming the street in front of the Soviet embassy Sakharov Plaza, that it had a very positive effect. Now, the Soviets didn't like it. They howled mightily. But the heat and light and attention of world scrutiny helped change their behavior and helped win the Cold War. You know, Mr. President, to Liu Xiaobo, to Liu Xia, to all of the human rights dissidents imprisoned in China, to the mothers who faced forcible abortions, I hope my words penetrate the dark prisons in which they're sitting. I hope my words serve as light and encouragement to each of them. I think back to when my father and my aunt were in Cuban prisons. How much I would have liked leadership in the United States to shine a light of hope and encouragement. You know, some months ago I met with Natan Sharansky in Jerusalem. He described how in the dark of the Soviet gulag, President Ronald Reagan's words shined into that darkness and prisoners passed from cell to cell. Did you hear what President Reagan said? Evil empire, ash heap of history, tear down this wall. Those words, that moral clarity, that American leadership for human rights changed the world. If we stand together, we can do the same thing with regard to China. But as much as I hope that my words penetrate those cells, I pray that the words and actions of the senior senator from California do not penetrate those cells. It saddens me that in the face of unspeakable brutality and evil, that the Democratic senator chooses to align herself with the Communist Party dictators rather than a Nobel Peace Laureate. My hope is that time and reflection will cause the senior senator from California to recognize that we should be united as a bipartisan matter in support of human rights. It is my hope that we stand together. I intend to continue introducing this resolution over and over and over again, because every time the light is shined on the grotesque evil of what China is doing, we are vindicating our values of who we are as Americans. And it is my hope, as I speak out to the Chinese American citizens in California, in Texas, and across this country, that their voice is heard by their senior senator from California. That the Chinese American citizens ask their senior senator, why is it that you are standing and defending the communist government in China for its human rights abuses? I can tell you, Mr. President, that's not a question I would want to answer to my constituents who I am charged with representing. It is my hope that all of us say, listen, we can disagree on all sorts of political matters. We can disagree on marginal tax rates. But when it comes to forced abortions, when it comes to imprisoning and mistreating and torturing political prisoners, including a Nobel Peace Laureate, the United States Senate stands in unanimity 100-0. That is my hope that in time, truth will prevail. I yield the floor.